Hey everybody, welcome to Rust Belt Startup. I'm your host, Ryan Miller. It's my podcast. It's full of long-form conversations with artists, entrepreneurs, educators, people that are living unconventional lives in unconventional locations. And I really am excited to share today's conversation. It's very different than most anything that I've done on the podcast. And I can say, without exaggeration, this is one of the most extraordinary stories that I've ever heard, and maybe one of the most important. So my guest today is Max Smith. He's a historian, a storyteller, and a lifelong steward of the history of Peterboro, New York. So this is a tiny village in Madison County that most people have never heard of, but that quietly shaped the course of American history. So what you're about to hear is the story of how the abolitionist movement functioned in many ways like an early startup. So a small group of people that had an idea that was considered radical, dangerous, and disruptive. And the epicenters of that abolitionist movement, it wasn't Boston or Washington, it was right here in upstate New York. The story starts with a drunken mob shutting down an abolitionist meeting in Utica, and how that meeting was reborn the next day in Peterboro, and hundreds of people walked miles overnight to continue that work. And those choices sent ripples across the country that still shape our politics today. Now, Max walks us through the life of Garrett Smith, whom I'm sure you've probably never heard of. I've never heard of him, but he was one of the wealthiest men in America in the 1800s. And after this event, he started giving away his fortune to fund abolition, women's suffrage, and civil rights. He was hosting Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, John Brown, and formerly enslaved people at his own dinner table. And his mansion in Peterboro became one of the stops on the Underground Railroad. This is also a deeply personal story for Max. It's one that connects his own family lineage directly to the Underground Railroad, the Civil War, and the long arc of freedom in this country. So if you care about how change actually happens and how movements are built, how courage, community, and conviction scale over time, this is a conversation you are not going to forget. It's not a startup story in the way we usually tell them, but it might be one of the most powerful ones we've ever shared. This was a great privilege to host Max, and I really hope you enjoy our conversation. Could I just jump right into it? Because could we start where I really want to focus on? There's a lot of things I want to focus on. Obviously, Peterboro is not a place that I've ever heard of, but I don't want to start at Peterboro. I was wondering if before we get to Peterboro, you could talk about Utica, because when I had heard you speak previously, you had talked about Utica was not an abolitionist town.
No,
and
not many places were.
Not many places were, right? And you get to 1835, and there's going to be a meeting in Utica. Mm-hmm. Could you take me through kind of that period of time and what was going on?
Let me go back and tie in that a little bit further, because so much of this story comes to revolve around Garrett Smith.
Yeah.
Garrett Smith was born in Utica.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
March 6th, 1797.
Okay.
Born in Utica. His father had moved up here, Peter Smith, to be a partner in business with John Jacob Astor.
Okay.
That's the stratosphere, the social stratosphere they hung out with. So Garrett is born here. His father moves to this little hamlet over in Madison County, becomes Peterboro, Peter Smith, and the town becomes Smithfield.
Okay.
He goes to Hamilton College in Clinton, graduates as valedictorian of his class, and has the intent to become a lawyer.
Okay.
Like many young men, the plans you have, life gets in the way. Without getting into those weeds, he ends up taking over the family business, which, interestingly, his father doesn't give him. He has to purchase it.
Okay.
But move ahead to 1835. He is quite a presence, one of the largest, if not the largest, landowner in the state of New York, an incredibly wealthy man, a billionaire by today's standards. And he receives an invitation to come over to a church in Utica because a friend, what was that friend's name? Beriah Green. I thought it was Beriah.
Okay.
Beriah Green, who's a respected and well-known abolitionist, is involved in an effort to organize the various community abolitionist groups around New York State, paralleling something that happened in Pennsylvania, and coalesce around one organization, the New York State Anti-Slavery Society. Anyway, they expect, a few people to show up, and they're going to have this meeting, and they're going to organize. And it was a Presbyterian church.
Okay.
Well, over 400 people show up.
That were supportive or
that were
against?
supportive,
Okay.
of this initiative to form the New York State Anti-Slavery Society. Shortly afterward, unbeknownst to them, an armed mob shows up that had been priming themselves all evening with the previous evening with liquor and whatnot that was being supplied to them by this guy named Samuel Beardsley.
Okay.
Samuel Beardsley was an attorney, a member of Congress, and a personal friend of Andrew Jackson. And he shows up at the head of this mob and says, you people need to get out of here because violence is going to ensue. And if that violence even ends up meaning the church is burnt down or destroyed or whatever mayhem ensues, the stain of that violence and the church burning will be less of an affront to the people of Utica than your continued presence.
Wow. So they picked up stakes. Is this happening like all in one day?
Yes.
This is happening right now?
That's happening as they're getting ready to meet. They haven't even actually begun. And
so then they pick up stakes.
Burst through the door. So this gentleman that no one really knows because he's just been invited as a friend of Beriah Green asked to address the gathering, and he says, well, wait a minute. I've got land over in a place called Peterboro, and you're welcome to come there and convene tomorrow.
And this is Garrett Smith.
And that's Garrett Smith.
Okay. And was Garrett Smith at that time in 1835? Would he consider himself an abolitionist at that time?
No.
Okay. So then, what the hell was he doing at the meeting? Because he must have known, right? This is what the meeting was.
He was, fabulously wealthy. But he was a real devout Christian who had some very positive characteristics about how he chose to live his life. And I think Beriah Green was probably pretty impressed with this fellow.
Okay.
He was, at that point, a repatriation fellow. Send all the African Americans back to Africa from whence they came.
Wow.
But as a result of this seminal experience, within several weeks, he completely changes his position.
Is it because of when he has the experience in Peterboro, or is it more starting of like, don't tell me what to do?
He was very clear about this. He was incensed that his civil liberties as an American citizen, being guaranteed the right to gather and to speak his mind in a public forum, was taken away by this lawless armed mob.
And drunk.
And that incensed him.
Wow. Okay, so they pick up the stakes, they go to Peterboro, and they're there. And what happens in Peterboro during that meeting? So
in Peterboro, which this was interesting to me because he was also a member of the American Pacifist Society.
Okay.
So he did not believe in violence and in guns and all of that sort of thing. But when he got home to Peterboro, he elicited the support of a number of people from the broader community to provide armed guards.
Wow. Because
they were frightened about what was going to transpire. Because when they left Utica, they weren't allowed to just leave. They were harassed, egged, rocks thrown at them. People were beaten all the way over to Vernon Center.
Wow.
They kind of split into two groups. Primarily, I can't accurately tell how everybody got there, but one group went overland through Vernon Center and that way. Another group of about 100 or so went down to the canal, found a flatboat that had been its cargo had been unloaded, and they rented that, and they took the canal to Canastota.
Wow.
There's a wonderful story, an account by James Caleb Jackson as he talks about how they rode down throughout the night, got to Canastota in the wee hours of the morning. It's not light yet. And they had no idea that from Canastota to Peterboro is about 9.5 to 10 miles, almost 1,000 feet of elevation change. It's straight uphill for 9 miles, basically speaking. And they had no idea of that, but it's really quite inspirational to hear how some of them were old, so they found a wagon that they could get some of the older men on and a team of horses or oxen or whatever they used to get them to Peterboro, and the rest walked. And they were engaging each other in conversation and singing songs and things. And as this group of about 100 people went up what we call the Oxbow, which is one of the routes up to Peterboro, people were coming out of their farms and everything and saying, "What is this? What is it? What's going on? Is it war?"
Oh, man.
And one of them that just inspires me so much said, "Yes, it's war. It's war against slavery. And we'll not take a backward step in this noble fight. Come join us." It just,
wow.
Yeah, so they get to Peterboro, and they organize. They do start the New York State Anti-Slavery Society. And within 2 weeks, this gentleman, Garrett Smith, has joined that society.
Well, it strikes me, too, that just the idea of one of the things I really am obsessed with is, like, how do you build and hold space for communities? And it sounds like, even in that act of, like, the travel, they were already building the society, right? Like you're traveling through this harrowing experience with people that are all kind of literally and figuratively rowing in the same direction. And then you arrive, and I have to imagine that a lot of the work had been done on the journey. How long were they at Garrett Smith's house? And he hosted like 100 people?
There were 300 people that arrived that day.
Wow.
But if you get farther into Garrett Smith's life and how this becomes an important stop on the Underground Railroad and all of that, throughout his married life, there was such a visitation. I kind of view Peterboro as like, what comes to mind is Chautauqua for me. Mm-hmm. People came there from all across the abolitionist field. I mean, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, all of these very influential and very dedicated people came to Peterboro. It was a place that they felt of as like, this is home. This is where we come for inspiration, for passion. There's a gentleman who came to Peterboro, and he said, when I went to Peterboro, it was abolition everywhere. Abolition indoors, abolition outdoors, abolition all the time, abolition everywhere. I know there are two places that slaveholders will never be, Peterboro and heaven.
Whoa. Wow.
And we have that over a barn that's there. It's one of the last structures that slaves actually hid in that's still there. And over the door we have heaven and Peterboro.
Isn't there a book called Heaven in Peterboro?
Yes.
Can you tell me more about Garrett Smith? Because, I have, as I was kind of preparing for our conversation, I would love to know if you have any more insights around, his, it sounds like because of him, it kind of became one of the epicenters of the movement, at least in the Northeast. And do you have any insights around, I think he met with John Brown as well, and Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman. Were they all in the same place at the same time? Was this like the gathering spot?
They could have been because, put it this way, his reach was long. Mm-hmm. He was he was a champion for women's rights, temperance, the fight to end slavery, racial discrimination. The list of visitors is like Harriet Tubman, John Brown, Susan B. Anthony, William Lloyd Garrison, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, as well as hundreds of slaves, because he had the habit that if you were passing through Peterboro as a member of the Underground Railroad, once you were hidden, that was one thing, but you would have dinner with Garrett Smith in the mansion house with he and his family and his wife, no matter what your state in life or where you came from or where you were going. From his diary, for example, there come this evening an old black man, a young one, and his wife, and an infant. They say that they are fugitives from North Carolina. A man brings his mother, 6 children, and her half-sister, all fugitives from Virginia. Charles Johnson, a fugitive slave from Hagerstown, took tea at our house last evening and breakfasted with us this morning. A letter from Sojourner Truth says, I'd like to come out to Peterboro and have a meeting there and see you and spend a day or two. He wrote from his office in January of 1881, Harriet Tubman is sitting by my side, and I've just written to Sanborn for her.
Wow.
So it was epicenter. The John Brown connection comes because he was more than willing. In his lifetime, he gave away over $1 billion in today's currency.
Towards all of these different
causes. I'm not going to get it exactly right, but at one point he's writing to a friend and he says, it's true that I own over 250,000 acres of land.
Wow.
But I am in fact an agrarian who believes that to own more than one farm is wrong. I would be happier living and dying poor than be encumbered with this tremendous wealth that I have. Therefore, I'm going to try to divest myself of it in ways that the Lord would find beneficial and to serve my fellow man.
Good advice for some of the masters of the universe today, huh?
What a difference. And I got to warn you, I'm going to get emotional about this.
This is a safe spot, please.
Every time I talk about this, I get teary.
The same's going to happen here, so don't worry about it. It's all good.
What an example of I could go on about that. A man buys a farm from him and passes away. He shows up at the widow's door with the deed and says, you're not going to have the wherewithal to pay me. Mm-hmm. And in those days, for widowed women had a rough road to go. You couldn't work at almost anything.
Yeah.
He gives her the farm. And he did that kind of thing multiple times.
What was, I don't know that you mentioned earlier in our conversation, what business was he in? Because he bought a business from his parents, but what was the business?
They had first come up here thinking they were going to be in the fur trade. But by that time, most of the animals were
trapped out. Yeah.
They were trapped out. So they got into land speculation.
Just buying real estate.
Real estate. And he would send emissaries all over the state, buying up anything that was going up for tax sale or whatever that they thought would be good purchases.
Was it all family money, or was he levering all this stuff because of I think I had read he had contacts with all of the other, I guess you'd call them billionaires now, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. But was there was it all just family money, or was he building this? Because if he's land speculation, is he just buying and selling land? Is that
yes.
It? Okay.
But to put that in perspective, his holdings at that point in time, the port of Oswego was one of the biggest ports in the world, busiest ports in the world. And his holdings on Lake Ontario in Oswego netted him around $12 million a year that time.
Wow. That's crazy.
He had a massive amount of land. So here's what happens. In 1839, he hears that Oberlin College is going to begin admitting African Americans, and so he sends the school a deed for 20,000 acres of land and about $100,000. I'd observe that Oberlin is still in possession of most of that land today.
Wow.
Well, there was a trustee of the college named Owen Brown, who had a son who had this vision that making a change in the slavery situation in America was not going to come about from conversation. It was going to come about from armed insurrection, that nothing else would be sufficient. But he had no money and he had no moral support to accomplish this. His father hears about this and writes him a letter saying, I think I found a guy who may be a key supporter of your vision. You should meet this man. And so John Brown found his way to Peterboro and introduced himself to Gerrit Smith. Wow. And even though Gerrit Smith was a member of the Pacifist Society, I think, at this point, he's starting to get frustrated. Feels like maybe we're not making enough progress. Whatever it was, he compromised his beliefs to engage in which was always kind of a sticky relationship with Brown, who tended towards such violent behavior. Sure. And as a result of that, Garrett became one of a group of men. 5 other men and himself were known as the Secret Six, who helped John Brown to do his raid on Harper's Ferry. But if you look at the other men, there's ministers, different people. None of them were well off.
Yeah, he was the financier.
He was the guy who financed it. And in fact, when John Brown was arrested, he had checks in his pocket.
Were there any repercussions from that?
Garrett wanted, because of his sense of character, to come forward and say, I was involved with this. And his family was appalled and just prevented him.
Wow. Smith's home was really was it one of the last stops on the Underground Railroad, or just part of that continuum?
No, just part of that.
Okay.
It was an important stop because obviously he had the wherewithal to accomplish these things. So, he would even purchase people from slavery. And typically people would come to Peterboro, spend maybe a day or two, and get to Oswego or a boat across Lake Ontario, and boom, you're into freedom, or maybe another route that they would take to get into Canada. One of the articles that I read from this thing they used to do called Emancipation Day spoke of a giant volume with all the names.
Book of Names?
The Book of Names, yeah. And it was something that Garrett kept, that everybody who had dinner with him, everybody who came through Peterboro on their way to freedom, if they could sign their name, they did so. Otherwise, they'd leave a mark and their name would be put. So he had this log of all of the names. And one of the articles, it says there were 3,000 names in it.
Does the book still exist?
Best we can come up with, there was a fire at the house, at the mansion house, which is so tragic because we don't have the mansion today, which would have been a wonderful thing to have. Our best guesstimate is that the book was burned up in the fire.
How did Garrett Smith what was the rest of his life like? He's doing all this activity. He's a financier. One does not retire from this, right? And in some ways, where did he, I guess, end up? Because most people have never heard of him. I had never heard of him until we had met. And how did that maybe get a little lost?
Honestly, I think it gets lost because we have not been maybe the most dedicated, the most forthright, or the most conscientious about telling the story of African American people in this nation. Excuse me. And when I became involved, I was just astounded that someone of this stature could be, for all intents and purposes, forgotten in time.
Yeah.
Well, think about it. So here's a man who is a billionaire, who uses, without any doubt in my mind, the greatest philanthropist of his era. He runs for president 4 times on a platform of freeing slaves decades before it happens, giving women the right to vote in the mid-19th century, rethinking our relationship to Native Americans.
He was a radical.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Well, he didn't get a whole lot of votes.
Well,
but still, that, with today's viewpoint, that's huge.
Yeah.
He does all of that and gives away $1 billion in these causes, helps to drive the country to the Civil War. I mean, those people who know the history of the Civil War, and that attack on Harper's Ferry incensed the Southerners so much that it probably, gave rise to the firing on Fort Sumter. So you can make the argument that without Peterboro and Garrett Smith and Utica and Central New York, the Civil War doesn't happen when and how it happens. And all of that, without firing on Fort Sumter, there's no national anthem. I mean...
Yeah, the cascading effects
effects are huge.
Yeah.
Then you look at some of the other ancillary things. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, one of the people who's in the forefront of the women's suffrage movement, is his first cousin. who spends her summers as a young girl listening to political debates among the greatest progressive thinkers of her time, meets her husband there, Mr. Stanton, who was an abolitionist, and then in later years picks up a new mission with her, Elizabeth Smith Miller, who's another Peterboro-based person. So you can make some argument that the women's suffrage movement is a spinoff of Peterboro.
Yeah. That's crazy. It's proximity.
You can do the same thing with the Republican Party. Garrett Smith's 4 runs for president. If you follow that route far enough along, it meanders right into the Republican Party that nominates Lincoln.
It's crazy.
And we don't know this guy.
You know, my wife and I were having this similar experience where we I don't know if you watched the Ken Burns American Revolution.
Yes.
And we were like blown away that obviously everything is complex, but just how much is left out or not told. We were blown away by that program and just how much you don't know.
I've watched several times, and I was fascinated by so much of the detail and so much of the subtlety, so much of the stuff about the violence and the family against family, brother against brother stuff that was going on in the Revolutionary War that just kind of got glazed over in school.
Right. It's crazy.
I think this is much the same.
Could I shift gears a little bit and gonna ask you if you're if you want to, could you tell me about your great grandfather William Billy Smith?
Yes, this is where I get Madison County, particularly the town of Smithfield, probably had a higher degree of enlistment than most of the other areas around when it came to enlisting in the Union Army for the Civil War. Largely because when you enlisted, you got, a stipend or, they paid you, okay, this is your enlistment bonus or whatever they called it. Well, Garrett Smith threw extra money into the kitty.
Okay.
So there was some additional financial incentive. Not to say, and I don't want to be cynical about their motivations, but that certainly didn't hurt.
Sure.
But there was a gentleman called Aaron Thomas Bliss, who was born in 1837, lived to September 1906, who was born at Peterboro. And at the time of the Civil War, he was working as a dry goods store owner in Bowkville. And he enlists in the cavalry. I guess he was a bit of a horseman.
Okay.
And given the vicissitudes of war, I mean, he starts out as a corporal or sergeant or something, and before long, he's a captain. Well, you can see how that could readily happen given the, casualty rates and other things like that in the Civil War. Well, it was the 10th New York Volunteer Cavalry, and at one point during the war, he and his men attacked an encampment of soldiers in Virginia, Confederate soldiers in Virginia, and they win the little skirmish, and they find this black slave named Billy, who is, watching the Confederate horses and probably doing whatever other tasks they tell him. He's a slave; he's going to do what he's told. So as is typical in those situations, the fight's over. They say, "Okay, Billy, you're free. You're not a slave anymore. You can go north.
Good luck.
Right? And have at it." Well, he doesn't go anywhere. He continues to hang out with this cavalry unit, kind of behaving almost as if he was like my man Friday for the captain, even though they're going farther into the South. Seems to be counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Well, before a few months have gone by, Captain Bliss is captured while he's defending a retreat of this group called Wilson's Raiders. And I got to look at how many. He was in a number. Oh, okay. He was in Salisbury Prison, Andersonville, Macon, Charleston, and finally Columbia. That's a lot of prisons.
Yeah.
Confederate, all prisons in that war were just reprehensible, vile places where you didn't get sufficient food, anything. So the death rates were quite high from disease and other things, as well as internal violence, everything. Here's a man who survives 5 different prisons, unheard of.
He's getting moved from prison to prison.
He's getting moved from prison to prison, 5 different prisons. It's pretty rare that a guy like that you would survive it. Well, this slave named Billy kept showing up at the prisons and getting a job as a cook for the officers who had the best food, and some of that food would find its way to his friend Aaron Bliss. In spite of that, Aaron Bliss was getting weaker and weaker, so they concocted an idea of how they would
break him out,
an escape plan.
Yeah.
In those days, if you were if you were an officer, I imagine it would apply to both officers on both sides of the war. They had the uniforms and they had that sword. Well, they considered that sword to be not an instrument of fighting, but just part of the uniform.
Yeah, it's regalia.
Yeah, and I thought, you kidding me? It's a 3.5 foot long or 3 foot long metal sword with this. But when you went into prison camp, they let you keep the sword if you were an officer.
Wow.
Yeah. So he's walking around with this sword on his side, or he's got it with him, and they decided that Billy would sneak a big cleaver out of the kitchens because they're deboning animals and butchering and all of that. And whenever there was sufficient noise to cover their activity, because if they'd been caught, they would have been summarily hung or shot, they would hack away pieces of metal from the sharp edge of the sword, creating
a saw
that was hidden in his scabbard that nobody had.
So he's walking around with the instrument that was going to break him out.
Yep.
And no one
was any the wiser.
Wow.
So one evening, now at this point, they're in Georgia, and it's summertime, and there's, thousands of men in this facility, and the bathroom is an open pit in the southern Georgia heat. The guards gave you a lot of room when you went out there. So they decided they would go out to the latrine at twilight when the vision wasn't good, and they'd saw a hole through the wall and escape. And that's what they did.
Wow.
As they turned back, there's about 5 of them, and as they turned back, they realized Billy's not with them. Billy, what are you doing? Come on. I'm not coming with you. I cook for the officers. If I leave with you, the alarm will go out. You'll be caught and summarily executed before very long. So I'm going to remain behind. And he did that. Now here the story kind of, goes into 2 different directions. Some folks believe that after the war, because Billy had this dream of this place, heaven in Peterboro, he's going to go where his friend and mentor, if you will, was from, and he's going to get to Peterboro. The family believes that Aaron went back to the south and found Billy and brought him to Peterboro. Either way,
he got there.
I don't care.
He got there. Yeah.
All I know is that in I'm not sure what year the census was taken, but I've looked at a census, and there's this guy Billy who's living in Peterboro who takes the name Smith when he gets there, which is certainly appropriate. He marries and he lives out the remainder of his days in Peterboro, and that guy was my great-grandfather. So without all of that, I'm not here.
Right.
My family, my cousins aren't here, and we don't grow up in this central New York, area, which is
an unbelievable story.
I'm proud to be here. Now, the story is, I think, just kind of all tied up with a nice ribbon on it. Subsequent to that, his health is still bad from the war, so he and a brother of his go out to the western frontier to get involved in the timber industry, and the western frontier is Saginaw, Michigan. From Saginaw, Michigan to the Pacific is nothing but solid trees.
Yeah.
We cut them all down, which is astounding to me.
Yeah.
But anyway, he goes out there and he becomes very successful in the lumber industry, runs for the state legislature, and becomes a 2-term governor, one of the most highly respected governors in the history of the state of Michigan.
That's remarkable.
At the end of his term, around the turn of the century, 1903, 4, in there, he returns to Peterboro on a train, and he brings with him one of the first Civil War statues ever in this area. And it still sits on the village green. And it was a commemoration of his life, his birth in Peterboro, and his friend Billy Smith.
That's amazing. There's an epilogue to this, too, if I remember correctly. And I'm going to ask you to fill in the gaps here because the sword still exists.
Yes, it does.
Can you tell me about that?
So the family that I mentioned that went down south and did the research, that sword has been in their family ever since. Yeah. And I heard a lady talking to a group of people on the village green in Peterborough. My mom and I were there. And I'm going to have trouble getting through this one.
All right.
And she's telling this story that I recounted here, and how that when she and her cousins would be at their grandmother's house, typically in the summer or whatever, at some point over the course of the year, they'd say, Grandma, get the sword and tell us the story. And she's telling the story, and she reaches in and holds up this sword, and I lost it, kind of like I'm doing now. Yeah. And I realized at that point, that's Grandpa. That's my great-grandfather.
It's an artifact,
And I stood on my feet, and I said, I'm a descendant of that man. And she said, what?
Wow.
Tears running down her face, we hug, and our families are hugging. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I've had the exquisite pleasure of putting that sword in the hands of middle schoolers and kids in 4th, 5th grade and letting them touch a piece of American history, a good piece of our history.
Right.
A friendship between a white guy who was privileged and had all of the advantages that came with that, and a slave whose bond and whose compassion and respect for each other changed history.
Yeah.
There's a lesson there, too.
I think also, the thing that keeps coming to my mind is like just how wide the ripples go when you throw a pebble in. You know what I mean? When you talk about any of these situations, like, man, the ripple effect on history and on we're having a conversation here in Utica, a couple hundred years later, but that it just strikes me that you're the person that has the data and the research, but the effects are on people that will never know, right? Like they just you just how could you know? It's crazy.
It's important to try to let them know.
It's true. That's true. Thank you for sharing that. I have one random. This is going to sound like a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Which is, when you're telling the story about Billy and he goes, he gets a job as a cook or as cooking for the officers. Was he not worried about being captured or re-enslaved, or what was it about that period of time where he was working and it was in the South versus? I'm like, first of all, it's dangerous from a war perspective, but was he just like?
I have nothing but my own supposition.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious.
And what I've come up with is he must have seen or sensed something in Aaron Bliss that he thought was important.
He was right.
Because he stayed
in
a place that was dangerous. He stayed in a place where he could have easily been recaptured and gone back into slavery. I don't think, could he believe that the outcome of the war was inevitable? I don't know. Certainly at that point, the Union was doing pretty well, but
even how
my instinct would have been to go
get the
north.
hell out of here. And even if you're there, how do you have a macro in that time? You can have a macro sense of what was going on.
Exactly. So I can't account for it.
Okay. You talked about the Book of Names, but there is still I'd love you to tell me about the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Emancipation Day, and the ceremony that the events that still exist that people that hear the story can experience or participate in.
I would love to. I'm going to start with Emancipation Day because it just kind of links naturally from what we're talking about. There are some wonderful people dedicated, learned, Norm Dan, Dot Wilsey, Milton Cernett, just educated, wonderfully dedicated, knowledgeable people that have been passionate about all of this history. I mention them because I'm a disciple at their feet. I learned all of this from them. And a dear friend who's since departed, a former attorney and judge, Hugh Humphreys, wonderful man. Dot Wilsey sent me these articles from local newspapers, and when I read them, it changed me. I'm going to do just a couple of quick ones for you. The Oswego Palladium, August 8, 1925. With gratitude heartfelt, more than 600 Negroes of central New York made a pilgrimage yesterday to the Gerrit Smith Mansion in Peterboro, where appropriate exercises marked the celebration of the first Emancipation Day. Unscarred by the ravages of time and the inroads of weather, the mansion stands today virtually as it stood during the Civil War, when it marked the beginning of the historically famous Underground Railroad, through which hundreds of Southern Negroes made their way to Canada through Utica on their way north. Smith was one of the North's prominent abolitionists and boon companion of William Lloyd Garrison and John Brown, champions of the slaves. Gerrit Smith Miller, grandson, showed the visitors a permanent memory of the gratitude of the slaves whom his grandfather helped. It was a massive volume containing the names of 3,000 Negroes who had passed through Peterboro. Another one. Negroes honor late champion at Peterboro. More than 1,350 Negroes gathered in the Madison County hamlet yesterday to pay tribute to the memory of Gerrit Smith. Considered one of the foremost champions of Negro rights, Gerrit Smith devoted a fortune during his lifetime in an effort to assist the Negro in freeing the shackles of slavery in the United States. Yearly, these acts of humanity are recalled as central New York Negroes gather for this annual event. It goes on to mention that the speaker at that event was a Golden R. Darby, who was director of the Dunbar Center of Syracuse. Tears came to the eyes of many as they visited the ruins of the mansion. That year before they came, the mansion burned down. One of them that I didn't include here was one that I love so much that talks about a gray-haired old black gentleman holding his granddaughter in his arms and holding the hand of another while they passed in silent tribute by the book. So moving for me. So moving. When I heard this, I determined that something that impactful and something that important shouldn't be lost to time, because the last that I could come up with, or any others that we knew for certain, was about 1934, 35, right in there. So for about 10, 11 years this took place. The people who started it was my grandfather, Billy's son, actually Billy's two sons, and some other men who were part of something called the Men's Council, or Men's Society, and they started this. And the call would go out to people all over central New York, and they came from all over. One of the biggest supporters was the African-American community of Utica, who had an Elks Lodge called the Gerrit Smith Elks Lodge of Utica. Most of the men in Peterboro were members of that lodge. When my father passed away, going through his things, I found his fez and his little elk paraphernalia from that time.
Wow.
And a prize would be given to the people who showed up. They came together, they sang hymns. There was a formal part where they would form by the village green, and they would march down to the cemetery and put a wreath at the grave of Gerrit Smith and remember him. That's when they would file by the book. And they had all kinds of festivities, of the time. Three-legged
fights, right?
Three-legged races, prize fights, you name it. Ball games were a big part of it. Baseball was big at that time. And they would have the Peterboro Nine, as they were called, were notoriously good. And even teams being put together from all of the other places together couldn't beat the Peterboro guys. So it was just great to read that, and I thought we should start this again. So about 14 years ago, 15 now come to think of it, was 2010, we had our first Emancipation Day. And it's held once again the first Saturday in August. At first, I couldn't figure out why in the world would they be holding this in August. Well, that corresponds with the freeing date of New York State slavery. So anyway, we hold it now the first Saturday in August. Everyone is welcome to come. I long for the day when we have 1,400 people like they did back in those days. And I've tried to emulate pretty much what happened then. Some fellowship, some singing, some sharing, and a trek to the cemetery. We lay a wreath at the grave of Garrett Smith. We've added laying a wreath at the grave of someone who was born into slavery and spent their remaining life in freedom and is buried at Peterboro Cemetery. Along the way, we found that there were about a half a dozen who were lying unmarked. So it became a goal which we accomplished to each year get a new gravestone for someone who had been unmarked and now is marked. That was very moving and very pleasurable to me to be able to unveil a stone that said, born into slavery, died a free man, Peterboro. And then we've added a piece now in the afternoon we try to use, for education, for advocacy, knowledge. Let's just not live in the past. Let's bring that forward to the future. So we've had, for example, one of John Brown's relatives come and speak to us about a book that she wrote, about her connection to John Brown and all of that. We've had a number of really good speakers. And just to plug that event, it's the first Saturday in August, and we begin about 10 o'clock in the morning.
Where can people find out about this? Like, do you guys have a website, or where can I learn more?
The best place to learn about this is we have more than one organization. So there is the one that I'm actually more involved with than even Emancipation Day is the National Abolition Hall of Fame. They have their own website, www.nationalabolitionhalloffamandmuseum.org. A little bit about NAHOF. In 2004, people who had come together to save the building that they met in to form the Anti-Slavery Society, the Presbyterian Church, was in danger of being destroyed. And a group of citizens came together and said, we can't let this happen. So they saved the building. Those people who saved the building they needed a not-for-profit and those kinds of things to do what they did. They formed the Smithfield Community Association. And they've done wonderful work in preserving key parts of the Garrett Smith estate and this legacy and the building where all of this took place. In 2004, they had an evolution. They spun off an organization called the National Abolition Hall of Fame. That group exists to honor the abolitionists, their work, and their legacy. This is their mission statement, I'm paraphrasing. Their work and their legacy, but also to continue the second and ongoing abolition, the eradication of racism in America. Can't say that without getting emotional. When I learned about this, I said, okay, I'm in. How, as someone whose roots emanate from that place and whose experiences and the experiences of all African Americans have been so impacted by those realities, how could I not be involved with an organization with such a lofty goal? Anyway.
Standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah. So much so.
People say we live in interesting times. I don't think interesting is the word I would use to describe it right now. But with all of your knowledge and history, what are some of the things that you take from this that I think people can apply to all of the crazy stuff that's going on now? I mean, I think about it. forefront in my mind is like essentially what you're telling me. If we go all the way back, right, to the drunken mob, is that, you know, a few hundred people got together and really contributed to change in the world. It's pretty encouraging. But I don't know if there's anything that you think about where it's like, you know, how do we take the lessons or the courage or the organization, and maybe it's even just like the story. It's like, this has been done before, we can do it again.
Two things inform me about that. One, I'm a child of the 60s. So I saw and was old enough to recognize and understand the violence of the 60s, the shooting at Kent State and all that kind of stuff, and putting that in perspective in terms of what we're experiencing now. There was a time when they were having debates about the North and South and slavery, that a Southern senator went into the Senate and used his cane to beat within an ounce of his life someone of a differing opinion. Well, our Senate is not certainly behaving collegially a lot, and being, you know, gracious to one another, but we haven't seen people beating each other to death.
In their defense, they're all really old and probably couldn't do it if they wanted to.
You have a point there. I'm not going to do this quote appropriately, I don't think. Accurately, but I think it's Margaret Mead who once said, you know, we can't really say that one dedicated person or a small group of dedicated people with passion can't accomplish much, because the fact of the matter is any change that's ever happened started with one person or a small group of people who had a vision that was meaningful and different, and they changed the world from such things. I take away that going all the way back to the founding fathers, who were flawed men, but who had a vision that they could evoke a more perfect form of government. We the people, is, you know, I think of the Gettysburg Address and what that great president had to say, and I think about that line. It's a line that comes back to me all the time. All the time, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. I hear the dream of Martin Luther King standing on the Mall, and I realize he wasn't the first dreamer, and it wasn't the first time it had been dreamed. But look what he accomplished, and we have made progress. But we need to make more, and we need to continue to tell the stories of our past, the truths of our past, so they might inform our future, so that we don't go blindly and with ignorance into the future, not knowing from whence we came. I can't leave you without telling you about some of the things that we do,
Please,
to try to inform and to educate and to keep these things in the forefront. Right now, we're just in the first week of something that is we call the Black History Matters video series. It's in its 6th year. We have a Colgate undergraduate who has been putting this together for us, and this year I believe we're going to have 2 videos each week of the month of February during Black History Month. You can access them by going to the NAHOF website, which once again is www.National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum.org, which has the schedule and links to the videos. We also have a NAHOF YouTube channel, and I can't remember what the name of it is.
I'll link it up in the show notes.
July 5th of this year, we'll be doing a Frederick Douglass enactment of his famous July 5th speech, where he wouldn't speak on July 4th, and he gave this speech, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" We'll be redoing an enactment of that. Of course, there's Emancipation Day coming in August, and one that is near and dear to me. I told you about this story of the people coming up and walking to Peterboro. we've turned that into a 5K walk to raise money and to raise attention. And we call it Walk the Abolition Road Walk. And it will be this October 10th. You gather by the canal in the village of Canastota, and we'll go up the road for our 5K and return. And there are some wonderful people, period dressed, singing abolitionist songs, a couple of things like that.
That's amazing.
And it's a great way to get a T-shirt, make a contribution to the cause, learn a little bit more about the National Abolition Hall of Fame and its mission. The museum is open May through September. Days and hours are also on the website. And you can also find out about membership, because we are a membership organization, and we would welcome to have your membership.
That's awesome. I'm going to leave it there. I cannot thank you enough for your time today. This is remarkable.
Well, thank you. I'm pleased that you remembered me and that you reached out. Sorry to bring such emotion to it at times, but
You don't need to. It's an emotional. If you hear the stories and the if you hear, I mean, if you're listening to this, how can you not be? I do not know. So thank you.
Yeah,
That's great.
And believe it or not, there are stories about personal stories about people who came there and what happened to them, how they got there, how they came to freedom that I haven't even touched on today.
I think you need to have your own YouTube channel.
We'll talk.
What a privilege to host Max. We've been trying to get this conversation recorded for probably a couple of years now, and I'm really grateful for his time. If you want to learn more about the National Abolition Hall of Fame, you can go to National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum.org. Long domain name, but it works. Or if you're interested in the 5K that he was talking about, go to abolitionroad.org. You can find a lot of great information about Peterboro and the work that Max is doing as well. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you share this podcast with someone you care about that wants to hear this kind of story. Like and subscribe wherever you're getting your podcast, and I hope something good happens to you today.